You're listening to RevOps FM with Justin Norris. When we look at how AI has affected go-to-market over the past year and a half or so, it seems clear to me that outbound sales has seen the biggest impact by a long shot. Let's look at the things that outbound sellers can easily do today that would have been difficult or even unthinkable a few years ago. They can scrape websites, they can perform these complex analyses of unstructured data using generative AI, they can daisy chain automations together, and the list goes on and on. So we have all these new powerful capabilities, but the question I keep coming back to is, what is the best way to use them? Because technology doesn't change the fundamentals of human behavior and what we respond to, at least not right away. So is this about fully automating the SDR function? Is it about using AI to enable SDRs? Is it about finding better signals? Is it something else? And today's guest has been in growth for over 10 years, and for the past 3.5 has been the founder of Blueprint, an agency that specializes in structuring any data from the public web about your ideal prospects. He's also been an advisor to Clay since 2021, so well before it became a household name in the SaaS world. And he's thinking deeply all the time about the questions I mentioned above, dropping a ton of knowledge on LinkedIn in the process. So if you don't follow him, go and do that right after this episode. Jordan Crawford, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, and I appreciate that you said thinking deeply. Let the listener be the judge of that statement.
Giving it an appearance of thinking deeply about
yes
about these topics. So and having a lot of fun in your videos, as I mentioned to you a moment ago. One of the reasons why I enjoy your content a lot. I would like maybe just to zoom out, like you've been doing this for a long time. How has the landscape changed aside from like the tidal wave that ChatGPT has caused? What's been going on in the outbound world from your perspective?
So to your point earlier about the intro is that at the end of the day, we are dealing with people, and people are a dynamic system just like AI is. There used to be a time where the play, hey, Jordan, I saw you raise money. I like money. Can I have your money? Where that worked. Or I'd be like, oh my gosh. Because, when you raise money, you do have a standard set of challenges. But basically, we've come from a world where the frontier used to be, it was hard to find someone's contact information. And then when that frontier was breached and it was easy to get emails, like the first people to jump on that bandwagon won. Same thing with the sequencing tools. So you used to have to type emails by yourself, and then the sequencing tools came out, and the first person to jump on that bandwagon won. And in those days, there wasn't as much competition. You were doing pretty advanced things if you were using sequencing tools. And we are now moving into this territory of diminishing returns with the same approach. And so what people are doing is they're holding on to their point. It used to be a 1% positive reply rate. Now it's a 0.01, for 0.1%. And so they're holding on to this system and they're trying to get every last bit of juice out of it. And it's really challenging for a couple of reasons. A, the deliverability systems have changed dramatically. You can't be sending on your main domain. I saw Tito had a post recently. There's an AI that just looks if the domain is registered less than a year old, and it just puts all that automatically to spam.
Wow.
You have to create these multi-domain systems where there are a bunch of inboxes, and you need to fluctuate the amount of emails that you're sending and the way in which you set up the inboxes. And if you use the same credit card on all the inboxes, Google and Microsoft will get you. And so there's a much deeper technical setup that's required. All right, well, that's fine. But so deliverability is actually a weirdly big and much more important piece of this. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the idea of a sequence.
I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's episode, Knack. I love marketing automation software, but let's be honest, the email and landing page builders are usually terrible. You can't make it nice without a developer, and marketers are going to find a way to break things or go off brand. You do not have time for that. So Knack is totally different. You set the guidelines and then give your users a building experience that's slick, modern, and beautiful. When they're done, everything goes to your map at the push of a button. And don't worry, it supports global teams, approval workflows. It's got your integrations. So head on over to revops.fm/knack. That's KNAK, and get a special offer just for my listeners.
One of the reasons that you ran a sequence in the past is because you had some insight about your persona. You needed to find their email. You knew the titles, you knew the kind of the companies, and that was sort of the best that you had available. But the shift that's coming, and it's not quite here yet, is that you don't have to rely on the same message to everyone. You also don't have to rely on the same targeting as everyone. So perfect example of this is I had a customer, they target K through 12 schools. They sell into that market. And they're targeting the person responsible for like teacher retention. And it turns out that that's at the school district level, that could be anyone. Like sometimes it's the head of DE&I, sometimes it's human resources, sometimes it's the assistant principal. Well, in a sequence world, you're like, what's the 80, 70, 60% use case? Well, you target this title and you send, right? So suddenly now with AI, you can send an agent out in the world for 1/10 of 1 penny. 1/10 of 1 penny. Let me repeat that. 1/10 of 1 penny. GPT-4o mini. It is very, very, very inexpensive. And you can say, go find the person responsible for this initiative. And you can also say something like, tell me how they're thinking about it. Is this school district even thinking about this problem? So when we did this on a sample set, we eliminated 75% of the companies. Now, the way in which you would do that in the post-AI world is you would say, well, they have between 5,000 and 20,000 students, and they're in Georgia. They're part of this program or whatever, right? You wouldn't have this ability to essentially do an unlimited amount of research to first qualify the prospect, know how they're thinking about the problem, and then know who is responsible for that problem. So all of those things mean that you can start to break out of this sequence thinking.
To double click on one thing that you said, my understanding of these AI systems is that you need to kind of break down that problem. Like let's say school districts in Georgia, like these criteria, are you supplying that criteria? Like this is what it looks like when a potential school board is considering this problem. Now, Clayagent, go out and find them and check these things. Or are you just giving that problem and allowing Clayagent to interpret what might be an indicator of that existing?
That's a good question. The problem that people have with this, with AI generally, is they want to outsource their thinking to it. You can have it as a thought partner, but to outsource your thinking to it, it will for sure be like, hold my beer, I got this. And the way in which that data comes back is, it's like, this is celery juice. This is not beer. It's like, it's a liquid. I mean, you got to give me that. It's like, okay, it is a liquid. But if you said, I'm into double IPAs, which is a disgusting opinion to have, but if you happen to be of that wrong opinion that double IPAs are delicious, you can say, this is a double IPA. This is what I want. I want this amount of ABV. I want to make sure that it is from Portland, Maine, because Portland, Maine, of course, as everyone knows, has the best beer in the country. And so, and Oregon too, all of Oregon and Portland, Maine, those are the two best places to get beer. And if you do that, you suddenly have a capability that you never had before, which is to answer the question, if you could spend unlimited amount of time researching a prospect, what would you look for? And so the problem is you got to get your elbows dirty. And you can start with ChatGPT. And so when you ask it to, like, what I'll do now is I'll send an agent out in the world and I'll say, provide me, in this case, I said, provide me 4 paragraphs about these 4 topics. This is one Clayagent prompt. And then I split them with semicolons. And it's like, oh, well, this school got a Maine Schools grant for education. I'm like, what the hell is that? It turns out that I have a whole new line of interesting things to go research. Okay, great. Maine Schools, there's some grant there. And then it said, well, this is how I found out that the titles were different. I said, who's the person responsible? And it's like, this is Jody. She's the head of basket weaving at the school, and she deals with teacher retention. I'm like, I didn't know that basket weaving was a title. And so you can have the agents help consolidate that information, but you have to then deploy your own thinking against that and go elbows deep and go read the main school grant, right? And say, is there something really interesting here? Because then you can start to see how the data shows up in the real world.
There's something comforting about that. I like the show Star Trek, and I have been, in my mind at least, likening it to like how people on that show interact with the computer, because they have to keep prompting it to like zoom in on this and what about that. They're partnering with it.
Enhance.
Exactly. I love that. And so it's giving me that vibe versus like AI just do my job and I'm going to go play ping pong in the other room kind of scenario.
Yeah. And actually, to further this, to go really deep in Star Trek here, there's Commander Riker would always leave his balls on the table when he would do anything. And there was a great scene where like Data's like, look, it's either you or the computer. It's 50-50. Like if we let the computer automate it, 50% of the time it's just going to kill us. If the human does it, so pick one. Or actually Captain Picard, I think is actually navigating. And at the last minute, he uses the gravity of an asteroid and slingshots out of this like deadly trap. And, Data is even like, you've used that thing as a gravity. Brilliant. And so this is kind of the trap one where they get into like a very old booby trap. And so this is totally the way to think about it with AI. Like another perfect example of this is I was feeding it 10Ks PDFs. These are like 300-page documents. And I'm like, quote the point in this document for NVIDIA's 10K that talks about why. It's like, Jordan, hold my motherfucking beer. And it came back and it just made up people. It made up a quote, and you were already seeing implications of this when it's like lawyer uses case that doesn't exist at all from ChatGPT to like argue that it's okay for us to each own a personal nuclear weapon, so there's a lot of that ridiculousness that AI. And so you kind of have to follow the old Reagan euphemism, which is trust but verify.
So this maybe feeds nicely into another question. I think you posted about this recently, that the future of SDRs is not an AI SDR team. And some of your answers seems to suggest why, but because there are people that it's like, meet your AI SDR, like these are products that are commercially available. Why is this a bad idea? Why will people not get good outcomes from doing this in your point of view?
Well, what you should notice is that none of these AI SDRs are like for whom. And so any product that is like, unless you're selling water, which is like, it's like, what additional value do you have for me and my industry? And they're making the claim that AI can just miraculously bring you leads from any industry. And what that means is that they have no insight about your customer. They do not know the market. They do not know why you bought. What they are mainly doing is sending outbound emails that are about personalization. Jordan, you wear a hoodie, I wear a hoodie. We're basically the same thing. I would love it if you could buy my B2B SaaS software. And so what you need to ask those AI SDRs is like, let me see the last 10 emails that you sent on behalf of a client. The message is where you can tell if there is hogwash in that product. And I can tell you almost all of those things are showing up and throwing up, which is we personalize the first line because God willing, if people read a message that talks about how they were on a podcast, they will buy my electric truck. Like I live in San Francisco, I don't need a truck. There's nothing you could tell me about me that would make me interested in a truck. Now, let's envision another variant of this AI SDR, which said something like, we help chemical manufacturing companies find and message chemical makers that can support high temperature ingredients. Like that is a believable sentence because it's like, you know me well enough to talk about my industry, talk about like a specific transaction I had. And if there's automation, I also believe that your automation will improve over time. And the one boner thing about the AI SDR as like a general concept is that it gets worse the more it is used. A lot of good growth is about creativity, but AI SDRs, because they are watered down, they're doing the same play for everyone. And so that will be fine for 2 months, 3 months, and they're going to change the system for everyone, and then people will adapt. And so because they're not focused on a niche, they don't get better at anything. They actually get worse the more people adopt it. So any product that gets worse the more it is used is it's a bad business.
So I contrast that with your example, the school board, school district example. AI is doing this research based on this very carefully constructed kind of research process that you've modeled out. So that makes perfect sense to me. And you're getting back your list. Is the SDR or the person still writing each email by hand in that case, or is it still doing a first draft with a human review? How do we solve that last mile problem that you just described?
Yeah. Well, let me answer this in two ways. The first is we are obsessed with personalization. It's ridiculous. We don't have a personalization problem. We have a prioritization problem because you don't know why that company's on that list. So if you can't tell me why, then you have no reason to personalize any message, right? Now, when I did a sample for this prospect that we're selling into, and I looked at 121 districts, 35 of them had any markers that they were at all relevant. And you know what? When I did the research, the relevance determined the message. And so we get obsessed with all of this personalization when really what I say here is what's a cold email that someone would pay to receive? So let me give you an example of that. And here's how I think I'm like a big fan of the idea of complex workflows because AI is getting so cheap. You can have AI do something that people never would. And this is a lot of like AI agent chaining. So here's an email that I closed a $6,000 deal in 2 days because of this cold email. Jordan, it seems like you solve X, Y, or Z problem for your, and then this I'm going to stick with the school districts, for your school districts. I searched the web and I found a district that seems to have this problem. Here is the contact information of that person, and here's why I believe they have that problem. You could even take that a step further, and I could do permissionless outbound for that company before I ever contacted them. So I can chain these AI agents to actually do permissionless prospecting for my target. And I can say, hey, look, I've got no beef in this, but let's say I'm messaging the principal at the school that my customer would target. Have you seen No Red Ink? They're a great software that will help you do writing assessments, which it seems like you're struggling with. No, I haven't. So now I can automate that response. If I get one positive reply, I can send that off to my ideal lead. And it's like, hey, Kim, I don't know if you've heard of Broward County Schools, but I just got a message from the principal that said they were interested in No Red Ink. Do you want me to introduce you? Right? That's an email you would pay to receive. I'm giving you a lead. And I could automate 100% of that with AI agents. And so suddenly now the message is not about what jacket I'm wearing or what school I went to or how there's a mascot or something, right? It's like actually I'm understanding my customer. I'm deploying AI agents on their permissionless on their behalf. I'm waiting until I actually have value to prove, and then I can actually send them that value.
I saw you post about this the other day. I probably, like many people who watch it, I was like, wow, that's so cool. That's so interesting. And then there's like a skeptical part of your brain that kicks in. You're like, but could that actually work in practice? Like, it just seems like so many things have to go right. How are you addressing that in the market?
So the devil is in the details here. And a perfect example of this is we're building a 10K finder for a customer where we're taking 10Ks, structuring that information, asking structured data. And Clay released a Clay template to do this, but they would find 10Ks that are 2 years old. And everything looks good until you look into it. And so you have to spend a lot of time with these models to do it because at any given step, you can have fuck ups. But the interesting thing is the models are getting so cheap, you can have another model, basically an agent, validate if the information is good before you send it. And the way I think about this is that the best way to deploy these models is the first thing is that every column of data, you need to look into 10, 20, 30 examples. And if it's making a mistake, you need to improve the prompt, you need to improve the inputs. And you need to limit the scope of that column so that you get reliable results. And the way in which you think about limiting that scope is something I call creative constraint with context. And the models are great if you use this framework. So let's talk about those three things. Let's talk about context. So you have to provide relevant context, which is their website is context, right? The key snippets. So you can have a column that just pulls out snippets from Google search results, which we've done. So Google, if you use Google, you know how you have that little preview? So if you type something in Google, that little preview, and if you can actually point Google at an individual website and say, give something in quotes, and all of those little snippets become context, right? So we have context, website, Google snippets, constraint. So constraint looks like something, I was on your website and I saw, and then those two or three curly brackets, 5 to 10 words about how they are managing their hall passes, period. And then you tell the model, fill out this sentence with this context. And that's constraint. So now it's ultra creative, right? Like it's inventing things from these snippets that are actual context, right? So it's creative, it has context, and it's been constrained. So that means that the models can reliably now produce at very, very, very low cost the exact thing that you want, and you don't have to worry about them getting these things wrong. So that would be like a specific example of how you can narrow this thing to make sure it doesn't make mistakes.
So last November, I watched as my LinkedIn feed blew up with posts from people at Mopsapalooza. They were raving about the conference and having the best time. Don't miss out like I did. This November, Mopsapalooza is back in sunny Anaheim, California, and it's going to be the marketing ops event of the year, packed with hands-on learning from real practitioners. This is the only truly community-led, tech-agnostic MOPS conference out there. It's got the best speakers, the best networking, the best social events, maybe even a trip to Disneyland. This isn't your 50,000-person tech company conference. It's an intimate gathering of folks who are in the trenches every day, and registration is capped at 700 attendees. Tickets are going fast, so go to revops.fm/MOPS. That's revops.fm/MOPS to sign up today. So in this process, though, I'm still not seeing any SDR. Like it seems that it's not AI that's killing the SDR. It's like a growth hacker with AI that's replacing the SDR. Or am I missing that?
In this kind of analogy, I think about the SDR as a horse, and that we are basically the AI SDRs. Like, it's a faster horse. We will whip the horse when in the morning, the horse will run. We're putting some 91 octane horse, putting it on the saddlebag so it can go faster. We got these great oats. And the problem is that if you look at the distribution of regular SDRs, let's put AI for a second. What happens is that the top 10% hate the job and get promoted to AEs, and everyone else is just fired. And so what kind of a role is designed for people to get fired in? And like most of the output is like, you're not producing results for us. And so the problem with the SDR, I developed another framework called the story development representative, which is that the best way to think about the evolution of this role is someone that can invent a test, deploy it operationally, and then take the leads that come back from it. And instead of trying to take this role that has elements of education that we're not doing well, we're not educating them, the buyers, we're not giving them any messaging, right? It's just like, I don't know, if you're talking with the CFO of a Fortune 500 company, I don't know, figure it out. Like what 23-year-old, I couldn't do that. I don't know what CFOs care about. Like that's an unreasonable thing to ask. So I think the problem is the role needs to be destroyed. New roles need to arise from the ashes, which are a growth person that can operationalize low-scale testing plays, a systems person that can maintain inboxes if you're talking about cold email or do LinkedIn automation, right? And then someone to talk to the customer. And that's the heart of a good SDR. It's the discovery, it's the understanding, it's the building use cases. Someone might call that an AE, but all of the work before that is really creative work. And the problem is that if the SDR is to survive, the only thing I think they should be doing on an outbound side is low scale experimentation, which is like spend unlimited amount of time sending 10 messages, sending 20 messages. Your goal is not to, we don't have a contact number. You have to contact 100 people. It's like, no, what's the very, very, very best thing that you can do? And if you could get it to work at low scale, you send that off to some machine here, to a Jordan, to be like, great, let me like connect up the data sources. How would I do this? But those people should be experimentation engines if they are to do any outbound things at all.
That vision has a ring of truth to me on some level. I don't know how long until we see it actually materialize within companies. But it makes sense to me that this SDR role has been stitching together various capabilities and activities that don't actually have a totally natural home. Like being really savvy and curious and researching and all of that. And then at the same time doing a million repetitive tasks. Like what super curious person wants to do the second thing?
No. Yeah, it's like what we want you to do. I had a friend he's a designer at a Series A startup. And he said, my job, Jordan, is to be creative on demand. And those two things aren't compatible. Like, so that's why I get my ideas in the shower. I go take walks or whatever, right? And I think that we just have this weird expectation. I don't know if you've seen like the product marketing triangle, which is like speed, quality, and price, pick two. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like we're doing that with the SDR. It's like you have to hit activities. Every message should be personalized. You're measured on output, not the quality of the test. And I won't give you any help on messaging or who you should target. And if you fail, we will take no responsibility for that failure. And basically the reason that you have to hire a 22-year-old to do this is they don't have the wherewithal to be like, this feels like a setup. I wouldn't take that job. I'm excellent at selling and I would not take an SDR job at any price because I'm like, you're going to ask me to do activities. You're going to measure me on things that are really silly. So I feel like that line of thinking is the same line of thinking that is like Wells Fargo like fired a bunch of people because they were using like mouse jigglers to like keep their computers active or something.
Mouse jigglers? Is that an actual category of thing?
That's a thing. You can buy it from Amazon. And so what I've got someone in the Philippines that works for me. And I was like, just so you know, if you want to expense your mouse jiggler, like, of course, happy to do it. We lost the thread, right? The thread is not, am I going to measure this person on either the thinking of the input or in some cases where you can, the output. No, I'm going to measure them sitting at a computer, which is like totally absurd. There's a reason that there's such thing as a 10x engineer. And in a knowledge economy, some people can do things much faster than other people. And it's like, that's the same thinking as this SDR. It's like, be creative. I won't give you any training. You're going to be measured on output, not the quality of the test. Whereas I think a much better heuristic is how many high quality tests can the organization launch in any given week? Because that testing mechanism is really what will save us because most tests suck and fail. But you only need a couple to work.
So the team of the future, I'm just sketching this out, make sure I got it right. We have like a Jordan type person, like someone who's clever.
Of course, I have to be in this narrative. I mean,
center him but someone who can come up with the ideas and do the like, what if we did like, who has that curiosity to traverse those byways and figure out a potential play. Potentially a technical person, if that a growth person is not already technical, who can help build out that vision and execute it at a certain level of scale. And then we have people that are like, for lack of a better word, nice people that someone would like to talk to, that when a lead is like, I'd like to speak with someone, they can hold that discovery, they can be congenial, they can be a bit charismatic and enter them into that one-to-one human process. Is that what it might look like?
We probably also, and maybe this exists, so you got it very close. There needs to be someone that understands why the customer bought. And we need to have more of those type of conversations because these insights, these things that you're emailing, they come from the customer. They don't come from an SDR. The way that I talk about this is that your buyer has spent their entire life getting to the point that they want to buy your product. And so it's like, well, how am I supposed to distill 40 years of information? It's like, well, you don't. You talk to them and you let your customer do that. And they'll generally tell you, it's like, well, why did you buy? Well, we're using HubSpot, but the problem is that turns out that it does integrate with Gong, but not like this one feature in Gong that we need. And it was so important to us because if we don't get sentiment analysis in our CRM, we can't do, like, they're going to tell you some weird things that you're like, we've never marketed that. We never knew that was a thing. You discovered it. So you need to basically extract those stories and then take those stories to market in a structured and repeatable way if you want to do growth of the future.
Feels to me that every conversation I have on some level, whether it's outbound or marketing or whatever, always comes back to like understanding those essential truths of the customer and their needs or pains or desires or what have you.
Yeah. I mean, they made the transaction. This is probably more true for mid-market companies. This becomes harder if you're talking with enterprise companies, like really, really, really large enterprises. Because like I have a friend, he's like 50% of my engagements with large enterprises, no one ever does anything with what I do. And they buy for totally different reasons. Like there are people at organizations that purchase because I was chatting with a friend this morning and a very large food manufacturer bought him. And they're like using him, but they're not like more, we want more. And I said, look, there's probably someone at this company that is responsible for innovation. And they need to report that they are innovating. And it's like, did you buy some innovation this quarter? I spent the hell out of my innovation budget. We are innovating. It's like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Well, the innovation is here. And so like you can get these like weird things where it's like, oh, in that case, the innovation person is not going to be like, look, man, I'm just trying to get in my innovation budget. And, you know, like they'll never say that to you. They'll be like, we want to believe in things for the future, blah, blah, blah. And so in that case, you have to take it with a grain of salt and you can't go and target people that way. But usually in mid-market companies, the customer understands the value here.
You're looking to spend your innovation budget? Spend it with me.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, like, hey, you know, here's how young and dynamic and from Stanford and from YC we are. Are you looking to like associate with that? Oh, yes, I am.
That could be.
So there are people.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm just talking about signals for a second because signals are all the rage right now in the trendy outbound LinkedIn sphere. And you took a swing at signals the other day, which I thought was a nice contrarian position to take. What's wrong with signals? We all love signals. Why aren't they a silver bullet in your point of view?
I have a feeling here that people are looking for the next laziest thing to do. Don't get me wrong. I am a big fan. What I generally do when I'm running any growth experiment is I do two things. I'm like, what is the lowest calorie thing I can do? Can I enjoy eating one wheat thin? Like, will that produce the energy that I need to go take a 10-mile hike? And sometimes, rarely, but sometimes that works. And I'm like, well, thank God I didn't make a 9-course meal. But if the wheat thin doesn't work, I make a 9-course meal. I'm like, okay, well, if the laziest, easiest thing didn't work and kind of knew it didn't, it only took me a week. But let's actually spend 2 weeks doing the best we can. Now, if that doesn't work, we have a big problem. So let's talk about signals. The way that people, I think about signals is when X happens in the world, reach out. And that is utterly ridiculous. That is not the future of outbound because it has the same problem with you raised money, I like money, can I have your money, right? It's like when X in that world happens, do Y thing. And this is why my response to this idea of signals is more like complex workflows, which is like the school example. We can go back to that and say, okay, well, only 25% of the TAM was qualified. So it doesn't matter what those other 75% do. If they post a job or whatever, like it's not relevant because they are not the cream of the crop. It's not what's happening at the account. And there is a world where if you think of a signal as after you have done all of your research, structured and at scale, to know which companies you care about, and you know that your customer will purchase if you find that they're doing this very specific thing inside of the job description, then send a message about it. I'm on board with that version of reality. But the version which I think a lot of these tools are selling, it's the same bag of goods as the AI SDR. It's like, when X happens in the world, send a message. But that is not really how people buy. It's not why people buy. And it usually is completely disconnected from the customer. And so that's my take on sort of this idea of like, if you just give companies enough signals and when Y happens, send an email, that's ridiculous.
What I'm hearing is it's not the idea of signals themselves. Like if I look at your example with the school district, the fact that somebody had a grant could be a very meaningful, call it lowercase signal that is important and is relevant, but it's the sort of reductive and simplistic and unsophisticated use of those signals. But basically, we ruin everything. I mean, like all other emotions since the beginning of time, we've ruined everything, and we will continue to do that.
There's a reason that Clay is doing so well and they are growing at such a great clip, because Clay allows you to capture the nuance in the world and structure it. And none of these signals tools, so far that I've seen, allow you to do that, which is like a perfect example. I built a tool that monitors anytime a keyword is posted on LinkedIn, and it's like instant. So it's like within less than a minute when someone posts. Now, the problem is that the person that posts might not be your buyer, and the topic of the post might not be completely relevant, and the company might not be a good fit. And so the signal here is someone posts on LinkedIn. Now, the unsophisticated growth person will be like, if they mention this keyword, send them a message. And you have for sure received these messages too. That's like, hey, Justin.
I've got multiple this week. Like, I saw you commented on XYZ. Want to buy this? Like, no.
Yeah. And that's the problem, is that these are how all these tools are designed, because they don't allow you to capture the nuance in what happened. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to personalize themselves out of a torture machine, which is like, if I only could write more fake compliments about you, then you'll buy my thing. Whereas it would be a different thing if I said, and let's talk about a complex workflow example. So let's say let's talk about a totally automatic. I parse your recent podcast. Actually, I did this with Airtable. But I parse your recent podcast and I say, okay, great. Who has this person interviewed? What are the general criteria of the people? Well, it's probably things like the amount of followers so that you can get more distribution on your podcast. It's probably something like, do they post on LinkedIn often because you know that they have something to share? It might even be, how controversial are their takes or something, right? Well, I can distill some of that publicly and programmatically, and then I can go find you another person to interview. And let's say I selfishly wanted to be interviewed. I could build this workflow, and I said, hey, Justin, I was listening to this podcast, which would be a lie. I was listening to this podcast, and you were targeting this growth expert. Have you seen Jerry? Jerry has about 20,000 followers, and he posts about once a week on LinkedIn. And specifically, he talks about this same topic. I looked through all of your past posts. I couldn't find that you've had him on. He's a good friend of mine. Do you want me to make an intro? That's like a much different message. And in that case, the only thing that I'm not actually trying to attempt to close a deal or something, I just want to provide you value. And presumably, if I can provide you value, it is the first step towards a relationship where you might then invite me on the podcast.
And that is way better than I also get multiple emails a week about potential guests for the podcast and stuff, because there's these podcast booking agents that's their job.
Yeah.
And quite often the guests are not very relevant, and they haven't necessarily done any research on the show or any of that. And that's a human being probably doing it manually, I think.
Everything I talked about just now, you can have AI agents do. I did this for Airtable. I looked at the partnerships page. I had the AI agent summarize everything that makes a good partner. And then I had the AI agent search the web for people that have a lot of LinkedIn followers that are all in on Airtable. And then I can go contact them and be like, hey, Justin, I saw that you're really into Airtable, but I couldn't find you on the partnerships page. Is there a reason why you didn't join? So now I have information back. You're like, well, yeah, da. So I can take that information, and then when I get 3 replies that are interesting and valuable, I can then go send a message to the head of partnerships at Airtable. And it's like, hey, Justin, I know you've probably been running partnerships for a while, but I'd actually just sourced some people that seem to be great fits for Airtable's partnership program. And here's some feedback about why they never joined, which I thought would be useful to you. There's no call to action. I'm not trying to sell you anything. Like, I'm establishing that I am a legitimate professional that cares about you and your job. And the second that you respond and you're like, oh, this is great, Jordan, thanks. By the way, what do you do? That is essentially an inbound lead. That is someone that is open-minded to have an honest conversation with you because they recognize that they are having a conversation among peers, not a cash-hungry SDR.
If we think about the future, and we already alluded to this about something works for a little while, we ruin it, like we spoil the environment, and we move to another section of the beach that isn't covered with litter, and then we mess that section of the beach up, but we move on. What's to stop us from continuing to do that? Like, on the one hand, we have these tools that in the hands of someone who's capable can clearly do some really cool things and scale out a thoughtful process. And then we're going to have everyone that just comes in guns blazing. It's like, AI, and it's going to be a mess out there.
I think actually this is the promise of the models. So let's talk about a resilient signal, if you will, which is the job changers, right? Like, Justin, you bought my cottage cheese when you were at your last B2B company. I imagine that you might want to buy the cottage cheese that I make at your new one. You're like, Jordan, I love your cottage cheese. I would love to bring it into my office so that everyone here can eat it. And so that works because my cottage cheese competitor, even though it's the same shit, can't copy me because they don't know my customers and they also haven't built the deliciousness loyalty that we have established, right? And so that cannot be stolen from you, essentially. And so I think that the idea behind it, I think that there is a product to come, and it might be a derivative product of Clay. These complex workflows, in the perfect example is the post workflow, so the LinkedIn post workflow. If I can take in the context of your website, this is all programmatically, identify the keywords that you would care about, turn on the monitoring, and then use that same generative AI to identify if they are good fits for you. And what I can do is I can deliver that as a Slack notification. I'm not messaging the customer in this case, but I am filtering the world for you. I am delivering you something that the large language model has taken in enough context to be able to deliver you something that is unique to you. So I think that if we are to build like these systems that can deploy to different companies, that is what will have to happen. And I think what will be true today also will be true tomorrow, which is there's a bunch of money, there's a bunch of dumb companies with dumb amounts of money that are trying to serve absolutely everyone, and their go-to-market will fail totally independently of how good your growth systems are. And those people run up against fundamental realities in the market that no amount of great workflows can solve. And I think that generally the problem with these horizontal go-to-market tools is that they are often selling to people that have no clue what they are doing. And so you get two groups together, the AI SDR, which is like an SDR for everyone. And it's like, we can make sure that we can target anyone, anywhere, anytime with the best message. It's ridiculous on the face. And then these companies that want to use those AI SDRs that have the same asinine idea, which is like, who's your ICP? Anyone under the sun that breathes and says the word marketing in that title. And it's like, well, what can you do with them? Absolutely anything in marketing, right? So get those two yokels together and it's like, oh, wow, growth isn't coming out the other side and we have no idea why. Well, I could tell you why. It is survival of the businesses that are producing 10x outcomes for their customers, where the competitive environment for their customers is like light relative to their solution. Which is to say that if I'm selling you a guitar, there are lots of guitars. But if you've never heard music before and I'm selling you a recorder, right? That is that's a huge gap. Even though the recorder is not nearly as complex of an instrument as the guitar, the recorder gives you music where none existed before. And the problem we have today is people are selling thousands of replica guitars to basically music experts. They're like, oh, mine has more strings. It's like, I don't need more, but you could. Like, you could use more string. Their strings are slightly better. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I guess so. And so there's just a lot of products that shouldn't exist in the world. And the explosion of VC money and SaaS has meant that a lot of people are trying to grow products that fundamentally the company shouldn't exist.
I think it's true. And that reality will hit a lot of people and they'll there'll be like a thinning of the herd, and that'll just be market forces at work. I want to close just for the time we have left, just for your thoughts about Clay. Not that I want to make it all about Clay, because I'm almost tired of seeing that word everywhere, because everyone's so into Clay since they raised some money. But it has seemed like there's this explosion, and I have a lot of thoughts about like what they've done well and are enjoying like really well-earned success in terms of their product and their community and the people building businesses around their platform. As someone who was like early onto that train, what's your perspective on what they've done right and what they are doing right?
Clay is the exception that proves the rule. And it gets people excited to build bad businesses. You have to know that Clay had struggled for the longest period of time. And they raised enough money in an era where that was relatively easy. And Kareem is a founder, like Ivan at Notion is a founder, where they're just these like thoughtful future dudes. You know, they like exist in the future, and they're like, what if you didn't have to drink water from a cup? Like, how would you do it? It's like, oh yeah. It's like, oh my God, amazing. And so what Clay did well is that they found, like, I talk about this like curve, which is if your product is really, really simple for a really niche audience, it's amazing. That's what you should always do. And then as your product gets more complex, it becomes worse. But then your product gets so complex that there are people like me that like love it, which is like there's enough bells and whistles there. Like, and this is true for like engineers or whatever. It's like, oh my God, 50,000 columns where I can put 20,000 prompts and I can connect 100,000 APIs. Like, and so what Clay did well is that they just built and built and built and built. And AI helped a lot of that complexity that it only developers could have done until Clay came around. And they made that easier. And they stumbled ass backwards into that because they just built a lot of things. They had a couple of early amazing engineers that are still there. It is a great culture. And they happened to find users like me that just were absolutely insane about building the things that we wanted. So don't replicate what they did. It is like ridiculously hard, and people now want to recreate what they did. And I would never start a business like that. But Clay's great. I love Clay. I just think that it's like the exception that proves the rule.
I think those are once in a sort of generation in terms of SaaS company generations. And the vibe that it gives me most is, early days at Marketo, which is how I started my career, because Marketo was workflows. It was relatively unstructured, just like Clay, in that like you can get smart people and put tools into their hands and give them a feeling of empowerment. Like, I can do anything. And that is the vibe I get when I talk to Clay experts like yourself or other folks. Like one other guy I spoke with, he's like, first time I used Clay, I just went home and I didn't sleep that night. I was just up all night, like just playing. If you can do that for somebody, the right type of person, then you have found like a tribe. And not everyone can do that, but when you can, it is magical.
That's exactly right. And the thing is that when Clay breaks, and it breaks plenty amounts of time, they have other features that you can use to get around that. And so they just literally built so much software that I'm like, oh, what if I used AI here and I could so it's like you can kind of do a little bit of anything in a no-code interface. And that's really rare to have basically something that can talk to any API. You're like, hey, does this field go here? And you're like, paste that into ChatGPT. It's like, what should I do? And it's like, oh, escape your quotes. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but I'll do it. Tell me where I do it. And so the combination of product plus AI has really kind of made it a tool for all seasons, which is not a good way to go to market. And they will see other challenges in crossing the chasm here, sort of Jeffrey Moore, but that's why it's doing well.
Super interesting. And yeah, everything that we've talked about, very fascinating. I really appreciate you coming on. Keep doing what you're doing out on LinkedIn, sharing your knowledge with the world. Thank you for that. And yeah, just thanks for spending time with me today.
Thanks, Justin. You can find me if you go to jordancrawford.com. That will direct to my LinkedIn profile. So would love to have any of your listeners here follow me and ask me questions. Thanks.
Awesome. See you again. Hey everyone, I want to invite you over to the RevOps FM Substack community, where you can sign up to get rough transcripts, show notes, longer form articles, and other bonus content. Just head over to revops.fm/subscribe to get free access. I'd also love to know what you thought of the episode and to hear suggestions for topics you want to learn about. Feel free to leave a comment on Substack or send me an email at justin@revops.fm. Thanks for listening.